It's a rigged game, and it must have been rigged from the start. That was a comment I received on my last video about the video game analogy for what might be going on here, what could be going on here. I want to read you the whole comment because it's a pretty interesting one. It says, well done and thought-provoking. So that's awesome. As a newer creator on the platform, I really appreciate a comment like that. Thank you. And then it goes on to say, it's a rigged game, and it must have been rigged from the start. Maybe there is a higher purpose to this challenge, but it's humiliating to see sick and twisted criminals in charge. And I'll just be clear on my position on that. I agree. It is, it's maybe not, I wouldn't use the word humiliating myself, but I would say it's disgusting. It's like, it's like, what's going on with this? Like, how did we get here? How did this happen that sick and twisted criminals seem to be in charge of this game, this reality that our consciousness enters into these bodies? And there's this long thing that I've heard so many people say that, well, if there's higher consciousness, if there's love, if there's, a God or a source or whatever, why would they let it get this bad? Why would they, in some sense, condone this? And I think there are multiple perspectives I can share on that, probably not all covered in one video. But the fundamental aspect of this is that, as far as my understanding goes, that this system is based in free will. It's based in free will. And what is the fundamental aspect of that free will? One of the most fundamental decisions that we can make in this reality is, are we going to align with lighter and higher principles, the ultimate sort of height of that being love, not romantic love, but like just the ultimate light of love, of loving your fellow human being, your fellow, your planet, loving, just emitting love and operating from love. That's one choice. There's also the choice of shunning that, closing that off, which is darkness. Basically, darkness is the absence of that love. It is the choice to say, nope, not doing that. Why would anybody make that choice of darkness? I mean, it's, I don't know, because I don't feel like I've really ever made that choice. I mean, maybe I've reactively done negative things. Well, I certainly have reactively done negative things in my life. That was always, though, when I did negative things, and never things like what we're seeing in the news today, by the way, never even remotely close to some of this stuff. No, I mean, I'm just talking about like when bullies chased after me, hitting back, and, getting angry at people, and, things like that. So that was, for me, a reactive thing, because I felt like I had no other choice. Now, perhaps this darkness could come from this idea of feeling that you have no other choice and needing to go do some things that you feel like are your only choice, and then getting into the habit of that, and then just going darker and darker and darker. I don't know. I mean, I'm not enough of a studier of the dark. What I can say is that I never used to believe in any kind of conspiracy theories about what's going on in, just in general in our reality. I mean, I think there have been conspiracies, but usually they were just sort of small scale. That's what I used to believe. Now that recently the current environment has really changed my mind on that. For one thing, I never wanted to be associated. One of the reasons I said no to things like conspiracy theories was there's a very popular set of things that came out under it started with Q, and the letter Q, and it was just far out, and it was like, huh, yeah, that no, just not going there. And from a scientific perspective, as a scientist, we're taught that things are pretty straightforward, that most of what we see is what we get. And it's actually from that perspective, as a scientist, especially when you're in this materialist mode, it's easy to look at it and say, well, all of these people who say there's darkness, there's evil, there's conspiracy, they're just seeing things where something doesn't exist. These are just aberrations of human psychology. It's possible. I can't prove that it's not just aberrations in human psychology. But recently, and I'm talking last 6 months or so, I've come to a point of view that there really is darkness. There really is, at this level of consciousness, embedded in this potentiality, this quantum field, there are agglomerations of consciousness that choose modes of darkness. And that those can then, interact with those in bodies and convince us to go along with that darkness. Now, not everybody's convinced with that. We all ultimately have choice. Do we align with darkness, or do we align with light and love and truth? And that's an important choice that we make. But I want to mention the rules of the game, because it does seem rigged. It does seem rigged if you're coming from the materialist standpoint and looking at what's happening and saying, I followed the rules. I did what I was told to do. I pursued things in the way that I thought were playing the game fairly and appropriately. And now I'm seeing this and I'm saying, this is BS. I get it. I've been there. I've been very angry very many times about this feeling of like, what is going on here? At the same time, though, one of the main tools of darkness, perhaps the main tool, is deception. If you look at descriptions of the devil, biblical descriptions, and I have never read the whole Bible, just passages. My mom has written books about how the Bible has been mistranslated and things like that. So anyway, I've seen some stuff, but the devil, the main tool, one of the main tools of the devil is deception, is making you think that the devil doesn't exist. And again, this is my understanding of the religious view of a devil. Okay, so if the tool is deception, then think about a deception that could take place where people who are in the game that I described in the last video, where consciousness comes into bodies to grow, to experience, to be challenged, all of that kind of stuff. And a group of players that are operating from darkness, from wanting to take from the other players, from wanting to deceive and misdirect the other players in the game, convince those players that the actual rules of the game aren't the rules of the game. That in fact, they convince people that the actual rules are wrong, are incorrect, are something, far out and woo-woo and weird and bizarre. And instead, they tell us, here are the rules of the game. And they give us completely different rules that maybe in a few ways echo the real rules, so they don't seem totally alien. But they're just far enough off that many of us who buy into the deception because we don't know any better, we grow up as children with that deception, with the false set of rules to operate by and to succeed by. We just end up following that. And if a mass amount of people follow those rules, follow the false set of rules of how this game is really to be played, then you get sort of a mass support for those who have hijacked us. Mass people sort of following along in this game, doing the things, being manipulated and not being manipulated, knowing we're being manipulated because we're following the false rules rather than the true rules. And the false rules are telling us things like, life is really hard. You have to strive. You have to constantly fight the other side of the political, or you have to fight your neighbor. You have to fight this. You have to, constantly be distracted by work and by all of these fights that you're embroiled in, and by all of the politics, and then of course all of the entertainment. You have to be constantly distracted and embedded in this march of just striving for more and more and more all of the time, so that you're not paying attention to us, the people who have hijacked the rules for their own ends, probably just because they like doing it, because they're negative. And you're off being distracted, chasing the next, piece of career success and fighting and clawing your way to the top. And you think that's the rule. And that is a pretty sucky reality. It's a pretty sucky reality where we're all chasing and clawing to the top, trying to just get the very best, eke the next little bit of money out of the system so we can get by, and to try to, move past the other person, get the next accolade, get the next award, get the next, whatever it is. And then we find out now that all of this heinous stuff has been done in the background by the very people in charge of some of the world's governments. It's like mind-blowingly horrible. I get it. But I also go back to this statement in the comment. And again, thank you for the comment. I really appreciate it. And I'm not trying to knock the comment in any way. I just want to point out there's an assumption. It must have been rigged from the start. That is an assumption. How do we know when the start of this game was? We don't. I don't. There's not a lot of good data on that. I mean, there's certainly a scientific assumption that evolution has gone in this kind of linear progression, and that more than like 5,000, 6,000 years ago, we just didn't have any language and any tools really, or whatever, that we were living in basic hunter-gatherer tribes. But that's an assumption that has a little bit of supporting evidence, but not a ton of supporting evidence. And there are others who, like in the Seth books, specifically Seth Speaks by Jane Roberts, she spoke to have, or claimed to have channeled, this entity Seth. And Seth spoke of a time of Atlantis, that he said, well, first of all, he said, time is not linear in the way that we think it is. And I've come to agree with that point of view. That our notion of just this linear time progression is pretty bogus. And I'll talk about that another time. But Seth said that there was this experience that humans made called Atlantis. And there have been others who've also said this same thing, that, through channeling and psychic means and whatever, multiple people corroborating. It's still not going out and getting data with an instrument, but it's a source, a form of data, that there was, and in the past and in the future, in this sense of time, Atlantis. And the Atlanteans made a deal with not the devil, but with negative consciousness, negative entities, in saying, you know what, we're really struggling to do some of the things we need to do to continue to thrive. And they were unwilling to take responsibility for certain things that they would need to do to make to continue to thrive and grow and be successful. Because this simulation is hard. This planet is hard. And I think a lot of us would just, I would just sometimes love to give my problems to somebody and say, here you go, take care of it all. I've tried that actually with employees and with assistants and just so many different ways of like, I've got this problem here. I don't want to deal with it. You go deal with this. Like that's a human tendency. So I can imagine if this story of Atlantis is real, or maybe it could be some other civilization that said, you know, we're tired of dealing with these challenging problems. Here you go. We're going to give the responsibility and control over to you. And the entity saying, okay, great. We'll take care of things. We'll set up the systems for you. We'll take care of everything for you. And you don't have to worry your pretty little heads about it because we got it covered. We've got it covered. And they show up seeming like they're fine, they're above board or whatever. But in reality, it's a deception where whenever we, in this game, this is a fundamental principle of the game, whenever we give away responsibility, we are actually doing something negative for ourselves. Freedom is always paired with responsibility. If we want freedom, if we want sovereignty, we have to take responsibility and we have to do the hard work ourselves. That doesn't mean like hard physical labor. I'm not talking about that. Like the hard inner work of processing through and understanding really what our next challenges that we have to overcome to grow and to develop here. And if we say, no, I don't want to do that, and we give that challenge over to somebody else to take care of for us so that we don't grow, we've just made a negative and misaligned choice. And we've also given that power away. So then if these entities, you know, get some actual embodied human beings on their side and say, hey, we'll give you all of this control and power because it was handed over to us because these people didn't want to take responsibility for themselves, and we're just going to build systems based upon this, and that just perpetuated and it lived in the shadows. I'm not saying that's for real, but I am certain that truth lately is stranger than fiction. And that is an explanation for how we could have gotten here that doesn't require us thinking that this just started off, you know, that this has been cruel and an awful place, an awful game to begin with. Maybe the game was started with noble intentions. That's my belief, that it was started to allow souls to grow and enjoy. And then it just really got off track and it got more and more manipulated. Now, I will say that there are people who just, despite all of the potential manipulation and deception that has convinced many of us that the rules aren't the rules and that the rules that we adopted are the rules. Like it's really crazy. But there are people who've just woken up and said, wait, no, those rules aren't right. They either read something from somebody or they just grew up that way. Maybe the consciousness that came into their body somehow shone through enough where they just didn't buy the BS rules. So there have been people throughout history that have been able to unplug from the rules and sort of, it's like side loading in a game or something. They're just like, or in a computer program, they're just like side loading in, operating on the side rather than operating within the false rules, within the false matrix. Which shows that there are another set of rules to operate by. These are people who operate more from a sense of love and truth and abundance, because I believe that the real rules of the game are about those things, about taking care of our fellow human beings, facing our own challenges and growing in facing those challenges, and creating a society that supports everybody in facing their own challenges and allows free will and allows people to come together in different groups with different belief systems to explore the implications of those belief systems, but without allowing it to get negative in the ways that we're seeing now. That's my belief about the fundamental idea behind this system. And I have a lot to back that up, but then I don't want to get into the, blah, 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 here are my citations and references, because that gets us into this intellectual zone where we just can't see the big picture. The big picture is, if this is a rigged game, how did that start? Did it start rigged? And nobody can prove one way or the other, but there is at least subjective evidence that that wasn't the intent behind it. It has been hijacked. And the next question that people might ask is, why so long? Why was it allowed to persist for so long in this very negative way? And one answer that I've received about that is that it was allowed to persist for thousands of years of human history, if you think of it as linear time. It was allowed to persist because it also led to so much growth for so many people coming here, that the sort of systemic negative influence that was continuing to manipulate us and tell us that the rules aren't the rules and so on, that was actually causing growth and development at that deeper consciousness level. And it wasn't so widespread. There were bouts where it got really bad, and I think there was some pushback. There were bouts, and then there was some pushback of like, no, that's going too far. Such as, say, a World War II event, where it just ultimately got pushed back, and it's like, nope, that's too far. No. And that, I think, is what has happened, and what we're seeing right now, that it's gotten really bad, especially with the advent of social media and AI and just modern monetary vehicles, like, or instruments, where through derivatives and so on, that people can get such massive leverage to manipulate and game the system, to just make mass quantities of money and take control over it without contributing anything substantial back to society, without creating value for other human beings. There are just so many ways now, technological ways, to game the system if you are operating in a dark way, if you are operating from taking, if you are operating from, forcing people, being a shark. And so it's gone too far. And I believe that at this time, there are two benefits to that. I know it's sucky. I know you look out and you say, like, whoa, what is going on here? And I believe that it's going to get a little bit worse before it gets better. Hopefully only a little bit. We can all hope. And that we are, number one, seeing the true negativity that has been at play. And we have to see that. Because if you think about free will, if free will is a fundamental part of this simulation, then free will, you can't exercise very good free will without knowledge of what the choice actually is that you're making. And so it's hard, because so many of us, I think, have accidentally gotten sucked into bits of negativity here and there. Not some of the depraved stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. But bits of negativity, like just getting sucked into, well, I just have to, work harder, earn more money, make sure that I'm the dominant person, that I push down the other people in my market or in my industry or whatever. And I'm just going to grind, and I'm going to go for it, and I'm going to dominate. That's not necessarily somebody who's truly here to be negative. It's just somebody who bought the false rules and really took it to an extreme, and the result is a negative result. And so now this thing of us seeing how bad it actually is and seeing the consequences of these false rules that have been part of this system, we have the chance through now seeing to exercise free will in a way that we haven't been able to do when it was swept under the rug, when it was all cloaked in darkness and deception, and we had no idea that that stuff was going on under the surface or behind the scenes. Most of us didn't anyway. I think a few people did. And I would often look at them and say, oh, look at that silly conspiracy theorist over there who's writing yet another book about some cabal or whatever. Well, now it's like headline news. It's out in the open. It's like documents from government agencies. It's all of this stuff is coming to light, and it gives us a real choice to say, oh, that really was going on. Which side are we going to align with? Are we going to align with the light and actually be advocates and no longer pretend, la la la, evil doesn't exist and neither does the light, it's all just material or whatever? Or are we going to align with that light? Or are we just going to keep doing what we've been doing, even if it was just chasing the next dollar at the expense of like pushing down employees or taking advantage of people a little bit here and there? It should make every human take stock. And if a human at this point in history, as all of this gets revealed, is unwilling or unable to step back and take stock and say, wait, which side am I on here? Really? Which side am I playing into? If a human is not able or willing to do that, then they might just be aligned with the darkness. They might just, or be so plugged in and so ignorant that, they're in for a rough ride until something gets even worse for them and it gets even more apparent and they have that choice. And some people in this simulation will choose darkness, period. But many of us are clearly choosing the light. One thing that gives me hope, there are many things that give me hope, but one of them is that we see the protests against some of the stuff that's been happening in the US. And by and large, they are peaceful. They are large groups of people coming together peacefully and doing things in ways that we haven't seen in the past. And really having some effect. I mean, I know it's slow. Like when you're in the middle of it, it seems very slow. But on a historical time frame, it's a fast, it's been changing fast from a historical time frame. So that was one thing, is just that we have to see so that we can really exhibit that free will. And the other thing is that it's an opportunity for us to wake up and see that perhaps we've accepted a model of reality that was false, and perhaps a manipulated model of reality from a very long time ago. Not necessarily from the beginning, but from a very long time ago. A manipulated model that said, we are without power. We are weak. The only way that we can get ahead is to, again, be a part of the system and do the grind thing, play along, put our heads down. And if we do choose to fight against anything, we fight somebody on the other side of the political fence, or fight against, this or that or the other thing. And that it's all about this kind of constant grind and constant distraction and constant fight, which is not what I believe this simulation is about. So it gives me hope, because I think there's one more thing going on that I have to do in another video, because this one's getting long. And that is that I believe we are getting help. That at this time, the powers that be, and it's not just like one power, like in a religious sense, but many powers, many consciousnesses of different forms and varieties that exist at that level of reality that we can't see with our eyes, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. That many consciousnesses that operate from positivity and light are actually here saying, enough. This has gone too far. There have been too many violations of free will where people have been hijacked, where people have been convinced that things aren't as they seem, or things are a certain way that they have to operate that way, and that we have so much help that's showing up to help us forward. And that this is a truly special time in human history where we have the choice between paying attention to the darkness and getting sucked into that, into the anger and the grief and especially the fear, and then projecting that forward. Because it's one thing to like say, oh, all this bad stuff is happening, and have that emotional healing, that emotional release that can ultimately come from processing the just the horrible stuff. That can be a valuable thing to heal and by processing that. But to then take that and project forward like, well, this, it's insurmountable. This says we're controlled and it's a hopeless future. That is where that chain of thinking goes awry, because there's a different chain of thinking which says, again, we had to see this. All of us had to see how bad it really was. And again, I think there's probably more coming for a while, so that we can make a choice and say, no more. Seriously, no more. We're not doing that. And saying that not just physically by going out and doing stuff like protests or whatever, but saying that energetically. This is the thing that the material, the disempowering set of rules that we've been manipulated with tell us. It says that things like, quote, energy don't exist, that none of that stuff matters. The only thing that matters are what you physically do. But think of the asymmetry of that. If that's wrong, if energy does matter, and those who've manipulated us know how to use that energy against us, but we've all been taught, no, energy's that weird woo-woo stuff, like, no, we're taught to be shameful and shy away from it and say, no, that's yucky and weird. So we are disempowered because we don't understand that reality gets created at that energetic level, and therefore we can't really fight back because it's so much more powerful when you work at the energetic level in concert with the physical. I'm not saying it's all only energetic. There's a complex interaction between the energetic level of reality and the physical level of reality that I'll have to talk about another time. So much to talk about here. So we have to reclaim the energetic space, the energetic, just through anger, through just saying no, like this is not tolerable, but even more than that, bringing down the energy of peace, of love, of light, and anchoring that here on the planet. And if you think that's bogus, there have been many people doing that over these past couple of years, especially this past year. More and more people are doing that. And we're seeing more and more peace breaking out in places rather than war. If you notice, so many attempts of provoking people to get into big fights with guns or with whatever, so many provocations have answered with just peaceful protest, with people saying, I'm standing up, but I'm not going to physically fight back. You can ignore that and say it's just random, Or you can understand that that is an underlying energy that people are intentionally bringing onto this planet and saying, we don't want this darkness anymore. We're bringing light and love and truth here onto this planet. And that is a primary mode of fighting back, of pushing back, of having a boundary is even a better way of saying it, of just like, no, no more of this crap here in this place, in this reality. We're done with it. And we had to see it to really reclaim our energetic right and privilege to say no to this crap. So the choice is yours. I don't expect you to right away believe me about some of the stuff I've talked about. It's taken me years to absorb things like this. Like that whole Atlantis story that I read when I first read that in Seth Speaks. I was like, no way. That's too far out for me. I was really like, that pushed me. And I still don't know for sure. I still have my doubts because that's what a good scientist does. You have your doubts. You collect data. But you do entertain hypotheses. So I don't know about Atlantis, but I do know about energy. All of my personal experiments with this idea of embodying energy and bringing a certain energy, it is clear how much effect, how in a way the reality bends around whatever that energy is. And I don't know fully how it happens. I have my ideas. I'll share them later. So you can consider, have I somehow accepted a false set of rules for how our reality actually works? You don't even have to believe it's a manipulation. You could just believe it's ongoing groupthink that has happened for centuries. Have I believed something that has disempowered me? And am I going to choose something different? Am I going to choose to actually think about, oh, I could bring in an energy of love, of light, of truth that will push back against all of this negativity? And that's where the real game is being played. So, I still have some exciting stuff to talk about that builds on everything I have been talking about. And I was going to do that in this video, but after seeing the comment, I'm like, I do have to address that. I have to go into this negativity. It's my best explanation so far. It's my model. You could call it hypothesis. It works for me, and it's worked for a lot of other people who are increasingly joining we could call it the light brigade or the light workers. Here, let's bring the light to this planet, to this simulation. Make it better for all. Let's head in that direction. All right. Well, thank you for being here, and I will talk to you soon. And oh yes, please like, subscribe, and comment. I love the comments. I know I've spent a lot of time on this comment because it was something I was going to talk about. And I will see you next time.